What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. In today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the first round of the draft, going over some of the surprises, and believe me, there's one big surprise, some of the things that were kind of expected, and maybe a quick rundown of my thoughts on some of the big picks, maybe all of them if I can get around to it. But before I get into my breakdown, my rundown of the first round of the NFL draft, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. And feel free to pass this video along to anybody who maybe missed last night's draft coverage. But let's start things out from the thing that gets the most headlines, and that is the biggest surprise, the biggest shock of the NFL draft. And that goes at number 8 overall. I think really most of the first 7 picks were pretty much to be expected in some variety. I think the Chargers were either going to go wide receiver or offensive tackle. I'm not surprised by Jim Harbaugh going with offensive tackle Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. I mean, that was his bread and butter, was incredible offensive lines at Michigan. So that doesn't surprise me. He also had really good offensive lines when he was coaching for the Niners, had some really good Pro Bowl, even Hall of Fame level guys on the offensive line there. And so that is not much of a surprise. I think J.C. Latham is a little bit high for the Titans at number 7. I had them drafting Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, so I think that is not too much of a surprise there either, and obviously running down the 3 quarterbacks, going to the teams that I expected them to, Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the Cardinals, and then Malik Neighbors going to the Giants. Out of the first 7 picks, I got 5 of them exactly right, and then I got 1, the position right, with the Titans drafting offensive tackle. So the first 7, I would say, were pretty expected. But that number 8 selection for the Atlanta Falcons, I had them going defense. The best defensive player, in my opinion, in this draft, edge rusher, defensive end, Dallas Turner out of Alabama. That was my mock. Instead, they go with the lefty, flame-throwing quarterback out of Washington, Michael Penix Jr. My reaction to this, I was covering a soccer game actually in my job as the sports editor at the Daily Nonpareil here in Council Bluffs. But my reaction, because I did have the draft coverage kind of in my ear, I was listening to it and watching it during the game, was wow, wow, wow. That's what I wrote down here in my notes. So they go with Michael Penix Jr. I was high on Michael Penix Jr. Really, I was. But I wasn't this high on him. I had him going 12 to the Broncos, which was about the highest I had seen him go. But right before the pick was announced, Adam Schefter was saying that the Falcons were looking for a quarterback, which is interesting. In a way, it makes sense. Honestly, though, I would have, if I'm the Falcons, using a pick of this caliber and potentially missing out on a player like Dallas Turner or some other players who were still available, even a Rome Odunze. I know they have some decent offensive weapons with Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson out of the backfield, but this one, and Drake London as wide receiver, this one, though, is kind of an example. Like, I kind of think of maybe like Dallas drafting Dak Prescott in the 4th round. I think you can use a little bit of a higher pick, but using your first rounder, especially this high. We look at Jordan Love even with the Packers when they knew that Aaron Rodgers probably didn't have too much left and was maybe on the way out. You draft kind of a guy that can be that replacement, can kind of be molded into that. And I imagine that's what they're thinking here with Michael Penix. I just think it's so high, especially also because he does have those injury concerns as well. Now, he's moved past those. He's had 2 phenomenal seasons the past 2 years, but even in that semifinal against Texas, he got a little bit banged up, and then against Michigan, you could see how that injury affected him. So there is still some injury concerns for Penix. I think that is a question mark to be answered. I think maybe he could benefit from a couple of years, maybe as a backup, where he's not taking all those hits, where he's not putting all the mileage on his legs, and just kind of learning under a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. I think as a veteran starter, a longtime starter in college football, I think started with Indiana back in the 2020 season, and then obviously again dealt with injuries and was a star for the Huskies out in Seattle this past year. He has the pedigree and the experience to prove to be, I think, an instrumental quarterback. And then the other one that was a surprise, A little bit of surprise. Well, actually, before I get to this, the absolute winners of the draft, I think. There's two teams that I think won, but the clear winner, maybe it's because these two teams have two picks, but I think the Chicago Bears drafting the best quarterback in this draft, and maybe for the last couple, it'll be yet to be proven. Obviously, drawing comparisons to Patrick Mahomes is Caleb Williams out of USC. The comparison to Mahomes are maybe a little bit early. I think he does have the capabilities and the potential to be a really good quarterback in the NFL. And then being able to get Odunze out of Washington at number 9, I had them going with edge rusher Jared Verse out of FSU. That was probably a little bit high. I was high on him on the prospect out of Florida State, but I think getting those two guys is huge. And the other team that won is a team that traded up into this 10 spot, and that is the Minnesota Vikings. They go up one spot, which initially I was kind of like, what in the world is the point of going up one spot? More on that in a different light, different perspective later, kind of at the end of this video in the back half of the first round. So they go up one spot. My thought process is maybe they were worried about the Jets going with a quarterback with Aaron Rodgers, almost certainly on the way out. Zach Wilson out of New York now. But the Jets probably wouldn't have been willing to trade that pick anyways, so maybe the Jets kind of pulled a quick one on the Vikings. But either way, the Vikings go up one spot. They didn't give up much for it either, just one extra pick later in the draft that they won't have because they got, I think, a late, maybe 6th rounder from the Jets. Pretty balanced trade this one is for a one-spot move up. J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan, though, is the quarterback that the Vikings took here. I think it's a smart pick. I think it's a good pick. Is 10 a little bit high for him? I don't think so. I think it pretty much suits him. I had them drafting McCarthy at 11. So I think this is a smart pick. He's probably somewhat of a safe pick. I know he's had some issues here and there. I'll maybe either link it in the description or pop up the thumbnail of my friend Noah Devine's video of McCarthy's kind of scouting him as a quarterback. So there are some things that he's really good at. I think he's a little bit more than just a game manager. And there are some things that he needs to work on, kind of, a lot of the typical young quarterback kind of forcing throws, decision making, all that sort of thing. But 11, not a surprise either. Jets pick Fashanu out of Penn State. I had them drafting an offensive tackle. And then the surprise here, and this I think is probably the biggest reach because I had him graded as probably a day 2 second round pick. And that's the Denver Broncos drafting Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. He has so much experience. He is a solid quarterback, but I just don't know if he's worth the number 12 overall pick. I think maybe kind of similar reason to why the Falcons went for Penix at number 8, and even why the Vikings moved up a spot maybe is, maybe the Broncos were a little worried that the Raiders would take Nix at 13. But when you see that he's available there at 12, at that point, if I'm the Broncos, I'm maybe waiting to that second round because I don't really see another team taking a quarterback, and obviously no other team did for the rest of the round. Taking a quarterback. So that one was a little bit of a surprise to me as well. The Raiders did get a big pickup with Brock Bowers out of Georgia, the tight end, generational talent. They already have Michael Mayers, though, so a little bit of a question mark there is taking another tight end. But, I mean, an example of a 2 tight end set that worked pretty well for a couple of years at least was Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez kind of started this whole thing with Bill Belichick in New England. So, and obviously Tom Brady at quarterback. So, I think it's a good pick. Does it fit with the Raiders? Maybe, but drafting a player of this caliber is huge for whichever team got him, and that proved to be the Raiders. And then there were yet to be a defensive player, and that continued to the 14th pick. Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State went to the Saints, the offensive tackle. And then the Indianapolis Colts go with edge Laiatu Latu, who I actually had going at 14, so really close with the placement of where he was picked. The Seahawks go with Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle out of Texas, Byron Murphy II. And then the Vikings, who I think are the second winners of this draft, go with Dallas Turner out of Alabama. So he slips all the way down to 17. I had him at 8 to the Falcons. I think that is just a home run selection for the Vikings. Obviously traded up from the number 23 spot to get this pick. And they really didn't give up too much. They bump up one spot to 10, and then they bump up to number 17, and they didn't have to give up that number 23 pick till obviously getting to number 17. Kind of running through a couple of these other ones, you had Amarius Mims, the offensive tackle for the Bengals, getting some extra protection for Joe Burrow, who's obviously dealt with some injuries, lack of protection, kind of shoring up that offensive line. At number 19, the Los Angeles Rams, I think, get a really good selection here. Edge rusher Jared Verse out of FSU. Mentioned earlier that I was high on him. I think he's a really good prospect. Did a phenomenal job in his 2 seasons for the Seminoles. Steelers, not surprisingly, I had him getting Mims, but instead they get Troy Fautanu out of Washington. The Dolphins get edge rusher Chop Robinson out of Penn State. I think he is a solid player. I think he has some things in his game that he needs to work on, but I think he has a really high ceiling if he could fix some of those things. The Eagles, I had him going Cooper DeJean, who is still available. I think, along with maybe like wide receivers, Adonai Mitchell and Keon Coleman is the best player available on day 2. But they go with the phenomenal cornerback out of Toledo, Quinyon Mitchell, who was actually the highest cornerback taken in this draft, which was a little bit surprising. He was taken here at number 22 by the Eagles. 23, wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Good selection there. I think I had the Jags going with Terrion Arnold, who instead goes at number 24 to the Detroit Lions. I had the Lions actually picking up the other Alabama quarterback, Kool-Aid McKinstry, in my mock draft. Instead, they get the cornerback who I think is probably the better out of the 2, and maybe I think the best cornerback in this draft. They get Terrion Arnold out of Alabama and in a trade via Dallas. Green Bay goes offensive tackle. I have a friend, Austin, if you're watching this video, shout out Austin, who kind of was hoping they would go with somebody like a DeJean or somebody else on the offense or defensive side of the ball. Instead, they go offensive tackle Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. I think it's a good pickup. Arizona had a really good year. Noah Fifita got good protection throughout the year, and that was kind of spearheaded by Morgan out there for the Wildcats. 26, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Graham Barton out of Duke. He's listed as a center. He's also played at guard, versatile guy who can plug in there and help protect Baker Mayfield. Arizona Cardinals, they go with the defensive lineman Darius Robinson out of Missouri. Kansas City then trades up with the Buffalo Bills. The Bills once again trading with the Chiefs. I think, if I remember correctly, they maybe traded that. Maybe they had the trade that allowed the Chiefs to pick up Mahomes. I'll have to verify that. But the Chiefs add another weapon, the speedster, who also has really good hands and has just overall has a well-rounded game. I think he's a bit more than just a speedster, kind of like John Ross was, the original holder, whose record broke, Xavier Worthy out of Texas, broke at the combine, the 40-yard dash time. I think he has a bit more of a well-rounded game. Dallas Cowboys get offensive tackle Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. I think that's a good pick for the Cowboys. Kind of feels like it almost feels like they draft an offensive lineman like every other year, because I'm sure they don't every year, but it almost feels like they do. Ravens go with another DB. They tend to do really well with drafting DBs. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. Look at a guy like Marlon Humphrey, for example, among other guys. Obviously, back in the day, Ed Reed. San Francisco 49ers. These are 2 that are a bit surprising. I'll talk more on the Panthers one here, but I'll talk about the receivers here specifically. Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who made the pretty impressive, maybe famous, at least to SEC or definitely Florida fans, the Jordan logo catch in a game for the Gators. And then wide receiver Xavier Legette out of South Carolina goes to the Panthers. So real quickly, on these 2 selections, personally, I don't think they're the best 2 receivers available, but I imagine the Niners and the Panthers liked both of these guys. Maybe, they preferred them to guys like Mitchell and Coleman who are still available. I don't think they're bad picks by any means, but I think when you have A.D. Mitchell and Keon Coleman available, it's kind of hard to pass on those guys and draft other receivers. But maybe they're hoping that these guys are kind of, the type of guys who are overlooked a little bit and can really shine. So those are 2 selections that also kind of left me scratching my head just a little bit, but I think they're good selections. And then on this Panthers, they traded up from the number 33 pick. And like the Vikings one earlier, at first, again, kind of left really scratching my head wondering, why do you trade up one spot? You weren't even planning to draft today anyways. Why don't you just wait till tomorrow? But I think with this pick, Bill Belichick actually on the Pat McAfee show was saying how with a second round, day 2 or later draft pick, you have, I believe it's a 4th-year option, whereas if you draft in the first round, you have a 5th-year option. So you have the player locked in for 4 years, and then you have an option to potentially sign them for a 5th year rather than just having them for 3 and having them for a 4th-year option. And with a position of this value like wide receiver, it is a smart decision actually to trade up one spot to get the guy who hopefully, obviously they hope to hold on to for that time, adding a weapon for Bryce Young to throw to. And on the Niners too, drafting a receiver shows that they're probably, the situations with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel are probably pretty murky right now, and they're probably expecting to maybe lose at least one of those guys. So that's kind of my rundown of the draft. I might have another video even later this week with real breakdowns of some of these and maybe more of a summary of who I think were, steals, especially in this upcoming second round. Maybe I'll have a video up tomorrow on that. But that is it for this round 1 draft recap. If you enjoyed this video, again, please feel free to like and share and leave your comments below, your thoughts on overall on the draft and how your team drafted. But that's it for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.